Hello and welcome to Valentine's Views for Monday. If you're watching on YouTube, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you're listening across the Big Blue View Radio Network, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. All right, Giants fans, it's Monday. Your New York Giants face the Seattle Seahawks on Monday night in a critical Week 4 matchup. And here to help me talk about that, help me break it down, help you guys fill some time as you wait for tonight's kickoff is Tony DelGenio of Big Blue View. Tony, how you doing?
I'm doing fine, thank you, Ed.
So this is a big game for the Giants. We know what comes next for the Giants. 2 road games against Miami and Buffalo. This is a huge game for the Giants. I think they know it. They don't want to say it, but I think they know it. But I want to talk about some of the issues and some of the narratives and some of the topics of conversation that have been going on with the Giants of late. And one of the things that we hear about, Tony, one of the things we keep hearing about is this idea maybe that the Giants aren't tough enough, that maybe they don't have an alpha player. There's been a lot of stuff about DJ Davidson getting thrown to the ground after the whistle and nobody reacting to that, and A'Shawn Robinson getting punched in the face mask and nobody reacting to that. And I've said, and I may have said it to you, I think that I've written that I thought the 49ers bullied the Giants. Some of that was just running over them. I thought the Cardinals bullied the Giants a little bit in the first half. Dallas didn't necessarily bully the Giants, but they sort of just shocked the Giants into a daze. But I do wonder about, you don't want guys to get into fights and all that, Tony, but I do wonder about the mindset of this team. I do wonder if they're too nice, and if somebody needs to step up and be a guy that demands a little bit more toughness from some of his teammates.
Well, I think that there is something wrong with the Giants now that has to do with this general topic of toughness, but I don't see it. I don't care that much whether guys respond to being punched in the face and stuff like that in the game. I think that all looks good, but I don't know that it actually affects anything. What I do think affects things is being tough in your play. And that's what I'm not seeing from the Giants. I was watching the games today, and in particular, I was watching the Washington Philadelphia game. Okay, and Washington has no place on the same field as the Philadelphia Eagles if you look at the talent on the two sides. Yet Washington beat them last year, and they came this close to beating them this year. If Ron Rivera decides to go for 2 at the end of the game, maybe they beat him for the second year in a row. And if you watch the game, if you watch both of those games, they're aggressive against the Eagles. They don't play the Eagles as if they think they're inferior to them. They take the game to the Eagles, and I noticed that with a lot of the teams, right, that are winning. You said, they take the game to the other team. I don't see the Giants taking the game to the other team in any of the games they've played this season. They don't look aggressive on defense. I wonder whether, with all the new people who are in the starting lineup, whether it be rookies or guys they traded for, signed as free agents or whatever, whether people are still confused about how to play Wink Martindale's defense, since it is different from other defenses around the league. I don't know if they just don't know their teammates well enough to know what to expect their teammates to do in a particular situation, and so they're not sure what they should do. I'm not sure what the problem is, and And of course, what doesn't help in all of this is that if you want to talk about being bullied, the offensive line of the Giants has gotten bullied in certainly in two of the three games they played. To some extent, in the other game, even in the game they won, they got bullied in the first half. And I think it's pretty difficult to establish much when you're playing scared, I think. And they look like they're playing scared to me a lot of the time, or they look like they're playing tentative. At least I can't blame them for being tentative on offense when you have these outright jailbreaks along the offensive line, so that your quarterback doesn't even have 2 seconds before he's got somebody on top of him. But if they could, I think, push back against the other team in their play, not necessarily in the after the play stuff. I think that's what I want to see from them tomorrow night. I want to see them playing as if they belong on the same field as Seattle, and as if they, not that they don't respect them, but they're not afraid of them.
It's interesting that you framed it that way, because I talked to someone. I happened to be at the facility for practice on Friday, and somebody mentioned to me that what Dallas did to the Giants, the Giants came off a 9-7 in one season. They won a playoff game. There was a lot of optimism about the 2023 season. And somebody said to me, what the Dallas Cowboys did in the first half of that game was they knocked the swagger out of the Giants. They knocked the confidence out of the Giants. And I wonder if the Giants have gotten that back. I wonder if there was such a shock, because I think the Giants expected, even if they hadn't won that game, I think they felt like they were closer to that level. I think they felt like they were a true competitor to teams like the Cowboys and the 49ers and the Eagles. And Dallas just knocked the snot out of them on Sunday Night Football in week 1. And I wonder, in a way, if the Giants haven't recovered from that in essence. I wonder if they're questioning how good they really are.
Yeah, and you have to put it in a little bit of context. They've played what I think by now are obviously two of the best teams in the NFL. And if you look at what Dallas and San Francisco have done, Dallas has scored 40, 38, and 38 again today,
Right.
against three teams that they played. And New England isn't a great team, but they're not a terrible team either. They're kind of a
Right.
middle of the pack team, right? Okay,
Very
and
much like the Giants, actually.
that's right. That's right. And say what you want to say about the Jets without Aaron Rodgers, but Aaron Rodgers doesn't have a direct effect on the defensive side of the ball. And the Jets are supposed to have one of the best defenses in the NFL, and Dallas hung 38 on them too. Look at San Francisco. San Francisco has scored 30, 30, 30, and 35 in their 4 games so far. I don't know that they've played anyone really good yet, but both of those teams are just absolutely on fire to start the season. And so on, from one side of things are not that bad for the Giants. They probably overestimated where they were going into their opening game. But if you look at those teams and how well they played against everyone else, and of course the one game that Dallas did not hang 38 or 40 on the board was against the one team that the Giants beat, and that
Right.
team beat Dallas. All right, and so people go, oh well, all you beat was the Cardinals. Well, the Cardinals beat Dallas, and so they're not that awful a team. So on the one hand, I think there are good reasons why the Giants season has started off the way it has. On the other hand, um, in Yogi Berra's terminology, it gets late early around here. Well, when if you're 1-3 with games at Miami and at Buffalo coming up, it's going to be getting late early probably, because the Giants will be really up against it to defeat either of those teams on the road. So they can't really afford to lay an egg against Seattle. I would argue that even if they lose to Seattle, things are not terrible if it's a well-played slugfest of a game between two teams that both see themselves as playoff quality teams, and both were playoff teams last year. And it just so happens that Seattle wins on a last-minute field goal, or or something like that. But the Giants play well, and they play them even. It would be terrible for the Giants' record, but at least I think it would reestablish maybe in their own minds where they stand as a team. If instead they go out tomorrow night, though, and play like they have in some of these early games where they're just getting run over by the opponent, then it's really, I think, we've got a serious problem.
Right. I think being 1-2, something that I have been saying, being 1-2 is not necessarily the problem so far. It's the fact that it's what the Dallas game looked like. It's what the first half against Arizona looked like. It's what the San Francisco game looked like. And you can take some solace, as you said, in the fact that Dallas has done that to 3 teams now. San Francisco is doing that to everybody. And yet the Giants thought they were closer to that class. They thought they were closer to that level. And it's been a sort of shock to the system that they're not there yet.
Mhm.
So I think that is the thing that has people sort of on edge, or in the case of some fans, as we say, ready to jump off the bridge per se, is just what it has looked like. And and that's so, because it hasn't looked like what we thought we were going to see. There hasn't been the explosive offense. There hasn't been progress made on defense. Kayvon Thibodeau hasn't taken that step forward that we were hoping for yet. Bobby Okereke hasn't been the difference maker we were hoping he would be yet. So we will see. But as you said, if you look at tonight against the Seahawks, I would argue that I don't care about style points. I don't care what it looks like. The Giants, if they're going to be a contending team in 2023, they have to win this football game. They just do. Because the chances of them going on the road and beating either Miami or Buffalo are not good. And if you're sitting at 1-5 after 6 games, you're playing out the string the rest of the season. You just are. If you're 2-4, you can argue that, yeah, after 6 games, it would be a monumental upset for them to beat either Miami or Buffalo. So you have to look at those as games they're probably going to lose. If you're 2-4 after 6 games, you can still get to 9 wins. But if you're 1-5, you're playing out the string the last 11 games. It's as sad as that is, you're pretty much playing out the string.
Most likely, Detroit was 1-6 last year, and they would have made the playoffs if they had only beaten Carolina near the end of the season. And how they managed not to beat Carolina with a playoff berth on the line, I'll never know. So I mean, it's possible, but you certainly don't want yourself in a position of being 1-5. I think that the Giants were given no favors uh, with the schedule that they got, because for a team like them that's building, you'd rather play some of the best teams on your schedule later in the season after you've
Well,
gotten a chance to get your sea legs. And unfortunately, they had to open right up with two of the best teams that they'll see all year.
and 3 games in 11 days
Yeah.
to open the season, when guys are still sort of getting their sea legs and sort of building their stamina and settling into the season. 3 games in 11 days, including 2 of those out west. That's a big ask. And then
Yeah.
you turn around, you get 1 home game, then you get road games at Miami and at Buffalo. That we talked about it all off season. That is a brutal, brutal beginning to a season for the Giants. And if they can go to Miami or go to Buffalo and somehow manage to win one of those games, things look a lot different. But on paper, you have to look at it, and you just have to look at Monday night at this Seahawks game, which is a toss-up game as far as I'm concerned. It's a 50-50. They might win it, they might lose it game, but this is a game where they need to pull out all the stops. They need to be aggressive from the beginning offensively. They need to make sure that their playmakers get the football, and they need to do whatever they need to do. I mean, I just can't watch the Giants miss 16 tackles again. I just can't.
Yeah, and obviously the missed tackles are a big thing. I think another way of summing up the Giants, and this is a question I think that is yet unanswered, is who are the great players on the Giants, the players who can take over a game? Because if you watch the good teams, they have great players that take over games. And you'd say Dexter Lawrence is a great player. Well, Dexter Lawrence has played well this season. His PFF grade is high. He's gotten pressures and so on, but he hasn't really dominated a game the way he did a few times last season. You mentioned Kayvon Thibodeau. Kayvon Thibodeau hasn't had a game yet like the one that he had in Washington when so much was on the line. That was in effect a playoff game. That game in Washington, I guess it was on a Sunday night. Whichever of those teams won was probably going to get a playoff berth. And for the first time really in his NFL career, he kind of took over a game and was a dominant presence. The Giants haven't had anyone do that on either side of the ball, and let's face it, they need somebody to take over a game on offense too at some point, and they haven't come close to having anyone on offense that has really made you take notice during a game. Everybody noticed the 2 catches that Jalen Hyatt made, but yes, they were great, against Arizona, and they were a big part of the comeback. But I think they were noticed. 50% of why they were noticed is that nobody's seen anybody else on the Giants do anything like that all season. So it really
Right.
stands out.
Right.
They need some stars to be the guys that lead the team on both sides of the ball.
Absolutely. I would argue that Daniel Jones had that kind of second half that you're talking about in the game against Arizona. Yeah. But you are correct. This is one of the things that people would ask me during the offseason. What do the Giants need? Do they need cornerback? Do they need a wide receiver? What positions do they need? And my argument was, I don't care. What the Giants need are difference makers. They need game changers. And they went out and they acquired Darren Waller, who they hoped would be a difference maker. To this point, he's got a decent number of catches. I think he's got 12 catches. But to this point, he hasn't really been a game changer. He hasn't dominated a game. Jalen Hyatt, as you said, had the 2 big catches in Arizona and did not get targeted in week 3. And I have a little bit of an issue with that, but we'll get into that later. Kayvon Thibodeau is drafted number 5 to be a difference maker and has not been that often enough. Saquon Barkley is hurt again. I don't know if Saquon will play Monday night. I do know this. I would be very, very surprised if he does play. I would be very surprised if he is anywhere near 100% healthy. He admitted the other day that it is very, very difficult for him to cut off that ankle. I watched him run straight ahead the other day, and running straight ahead at something less than full speed, he can do. But he admitted it's very difficult to plant and cut off that ankle. And if you can't plant and cut as a running back, you can't play running back at an NFL level. You just can't. So I have a hard time imagining that Saquon Barkley would be a big factor on Monday night. So a lot of guys who they had hoped would be difference makers haven't done it yet. And there's a question as to whether they can.
And I think, one of the I haven't watched film to know the answer to this or not, but I wonder whether the ineffectiveness of the Giants running game has something to do with Daniel Jones. If you'll notice, not really having much in the way of rushing success now. And I think teams after last year, really after the last couple of years, I think have become very, very conscious of the Giants in the zone read, because Daniel Jones has gotten lots of huge gains from that. And I think the league finally understands that, despite the fact that he's kind of a dorky looking guy, he's actually tremendously athletic, and he doesn't have that Michael Vick kind of elusiveness to him. But what he does have is he's got tremendous straight line speed. And if he gets out in space and gets steam up, he can outrun many players in the NFL. And so I think teams have become very conscious of that. And I suspect that they're not falling for the zone reads as much as they used to. I can't actually say that for sure, but I'm just guessing that might be the case, because on the rare occasions when he's tried to do that, it seems as though they've always had someone waiting for him. And of course, if you don't really respect the running game, it's a lot easier then to kind of guard against the quarterback than taking the ball himself on the zone read. And so you need to make the opposing defense scared of something on your offense, so that they are saying, what are we going to do to stop this? And I don't know what the answer to what are we going to do to stop this is when it comes to the Giants offense, because the Giants offense so far has just looked very easily stoppable most of the time.
Well, a lot of that is due to poor play on the offensive line.
Yeah.
And one of the things I will push back on is that Joe Schoen hasn't done anything about the offensive line, right? Joe Schoen has used 4 draft picks in 2 seasons on the offensive line. He's used a first, second, third, and a 5th round pick. He did sign Mark Glowinski, and everybody says, oh, Glowinski's terrible. Why did we sign him? He was never going to be the answer. Mark Glowinski, it has been an adequate NFL starting guard for a number of years, and he was exactly that for the Giants a year ago. Joe Schoen has admitted that he would have liked to have been able to sign a more expensive player. He would have liked to have been able to sign a player with a better pedigree, but he had to do something. He had to add a veteran presence of some sort to that line. And with the cap situation they were in, that's what he could afford to do. But I would just argue that it hasn't worked yet. We know that Evan Neal is still struggling, and the more he struggles, the more concerned you get about his future. But I would just push back on the idea that the Giants under Joe Schoen haven't tried to fix this offensive line. They've poured a lot of resources at it. Marcus McKethan might be a really good player, but Marcus McKethan missed all of 2022, including the preseason, played 20 preseason snaps, and now he's starting games. So he's just figuring it out. And Andrew Thomas is hurt again. He's still going to miss Monday night, which is unfortunate. I think we all thought he was going to play Monday. Ben Bredesen missed a couple of games or a game and a half with his concussion. So the offensive line's been a mess. I think when Andrew Thomas finally comes back, I think that offensive line begins to settle down. I really do. But I do push back on the idea that this Giants administration hasn't poured adequate resources into at least trying to fix it.
Yeah, I agree. I think they've done enough to make progress on it, and it just hasn't shown yet. I guess the question is, why it hasn't shown yet. And as you say, the injury to Andrew Thomas is a huge thing. I mean, he's far and away the best offensive lineman they have. I think what I'm looking for from the Giants' offensive line tomorrow night is, okay, you're not playing against DeMarcus Lawrence and Micah Parsons. You're not playing against Joey Bosa and Javon Hargrave and so on. I'm watching other teams today. I'm watching like CJ Stroud, who's had an amazing couple of weeks for Houston, and Houston is dominated Jacksonville basically, and then dominated Pittsburgh today. And I watched the highlights of CJ Stroud, and he's playing behind a partially second string offensive line because they've had injuries on their offensive line. And I'm watching the highlights of the game, and he's throwing these touchdown passes from a clean pocket behind a largely second string offensive line. And while I'm not claiming that your second string line should be perfect in pass blocking, I think what we've seen from the Giants offensive line is so bad in two of those three games that, you're talking about offensive linemen who barely lay a hand on the pass rusher. It's fine if you hold back the pass rusher for a couple of seconds and then he eventually beats you. The good pass rushers are going to eventually beat you, but they're just letting guys through almost untouched on a regular basis, and not just Evan Neal on one side, but last week with Shane Lemieux, even Schmitz let Hargrave right past him on one of the rushes of Jones. So they're getting beaten badly. I mean, really badly. And Jones is feeling so. It's not just the number of pressures or the percentage of the time Jones is pressured, because he's at the top or near the top of the NFL in both of those. I think he's been pressured 56 times, and that number is the highest in the NFL. So it's not just the number of pressures; it's the type of pressures. It's happening like right away, and guys getting up ahead of steam on him where he has relatively little chance to do anything. That's the type of thing I'm looking to see progress on tomorrow night, because not that the Seattle Seahawks have a bad defensive line, but they don't have the 49ers or the Cowboys defensive line. They've got a second-year pass rusher, Boye Mafe, who looks like he's playing well this season. They've got Puna Ford, I guess, is still in the middle for them, I think, and he's a good interior defensive lineman, but their defensive line is not one of the top 10 in the NFL. And so you should be able to, especially with 10 days to practice, to rest and practice, you should be able to give your quarterback decent protection, at least, so that he has a chance to get passes off, so that the receivers have a chance to run routes. They haven't had that chance in 2 out of their 3 games. And so I think that's one of the main things I'm going to be looking for on Monday night is just to see, can the Giants even attempt to execute the offense that they want to execute?
And I think that's always been part of the big fear, is that they wouldn't be able to do that. And obviously with the injuries and the continued struggles of Evan Neal, they haven't been able to do that. But Tony, one of the things I want to talk about in the Big Blue View mailbag this week, a lot of questions about the coaching staff, a lot of questions about Wink Martindale, a lot of questions about offensive line coach Bobby Johnson, a lot of fingers of blame pointed at Mike Kafka, Brian Daboll, the entire coaching staff. And I found myself defending the coaching staff by and large, because I do see most of what's going on with the Giants as a player issue. Missed tackles are not on the coach. Missed tackles are on the players. The reality of it is they can practice the technique of tackling in the NFL, which they do basically every single day. Every NFL team goes through tackling technique, tackling position, all of that stuff. But in the NFL, you can either tackle or you can't, because you don't get to hit guys in practice and actually practice tackling. If you can't block, that's not necessarily on the coaching staff. If you're lined up against the guy in front of you and you can't handle the guy in front of you, That's not on the offensive line coach. That's on you. Maybe if there's assignment errors all the time, we can argue about that. But what I want to say is I have been defending the Giants coaching staff, but that doesn't mean that I don't have issues with some of the things that have been done. All right. Wink Martindale bristled the other day when he was asked, rightly asked, as a matter of fact, about why Kayvon Thibodeau has dropped into pass coverage so often. We know Thibodeau hasn't been as good as he needs to be. We know that just by the flow of games, his opportunities have been limited. But the Giants didn't draft Kayvon Thibodeau 5th overall for him to be a decoy used to open up lanes for other people to blitz. They drafted him to go forward and wreck games. And Wink's got to let him try to do that. If he can't do it, he can't do it. But Wink's got to let him try. And I know I'm kind of droning on here, but I just want to finish my point. Mike Kafka was asked about lack of targets for Jalen Hyatt, lack of snaps for Jalen Hyatt. Brian Daboll was asked the same thing. And part of the answer, Kafka said, well, there's only one football. And Daboll said, well, there's a plan. But I'm sorry, guys. Coaches always say it's about players. It's not about plays. But those need to be more than words. If you don't want to be behind in games 20-0, you need to make sure that if Saquon Barkley's playing in the game, that he touches the football on your first series of plays instead of not touching the ball until it's 10 minutes into the game. If it's about players and not plays, throw a screen pass to Jalen Hyatt. Make sure that he touches the football. He's the most explosive wide receiver that you have. He may be inexperienced, but for me, some of the things that we've seen from the coaching staff are head scratching. I think it's a marvelous coaching staff. I still think it's mostly a player issue, but I do have questions and concerns about some of the things that have been done so far this year. Just thoughts on what we've seen, Tony, and on my rather long speech.
Well, I'll comment on Saquon Barkley and not using him in the first 10 minutes of a game. I'd add to that. There's an issue about not using him after the first 10 minutes of a game. If you remember the Dallas game, Giants came out on that first drive and they drove downfield on Dallas, and they were this close to a touchdown, and then they had the bad snap on third down in the rain, and then they had the disastrous field goal attempt, and all of a sudden it was 6-0 or 7. Was that the one that they missed the extra point on? But anyways, Dallas was ahead by a touchdown, and that whole drive basically was Saquon Barkley. I don't know exactly how many times he carried the ball in that drive, but they mostly drove downfield running the ball. And I thought, well, that's a good strategy, because that Dallas has a really fearsome pass rush, and you've got a right tackle at the very least, and maybe some interior linemen who may not be up to the task of blocking those guys. And so, why not impose your running game on the Dallas defense to make them start thinking about the run, so that when you do drop back to pass, they're not baring their teeth and just going right after you. So I thought that was a great plan to start. And then after that first drive, when they wound up finding themselves behind by a touchdown, there went the running game, and all of a sudden it was just passing, and Lawrence and Parsons saw that and said, "Oh, thank you very much, we'll take that." So that to me was a very strange coaching decision as to why they just went so completely away from the running game after it had been so successful on the first drive. As far as the defense goes, I have mixed emotions about it. You and I have spoken about how Wink uses his edge defenders, And we looked up the numbers, and when he was in Baltimore, Matt Judon and Zadarius Smith didn't have as many sacks for Wink in Baltimore as they have had since they left for other teams. But those teams where they didn't have as many sacks, they still had like 8 to 10 sacks a year, but they've had 13 to 15 sacks a year since they left for Green Bay. Smith went to Green Bay and then Minnesota, I guess, and Judon to New England. They've had more sacks in those places, but the defenses they've been on haven't been as good. Those defenses of Winks for 3 years running were like top 5 defenses in the NFL. And so you want to say, well, you're not getting all you can out of those guys. Well, whatever you're getting out of them, it's working because teams are unable to move the ball. And I'll never forget when the Giants played in Baltimore late in the 2020 season. Daniel Jones had been hurt a few games earlier, I guess, in the Arizona game. And I think he was just coming back. That might have been the first game that he started after he came back from that injury. But they hounded him relentlessly. And by the third quarter, I mean, the Giants' offensive line they just didn't know where to look next, and on every snap, Jones was being pressured. And so when he was hired to be the Giants' defensive coordinator, I thought back to that game and say, "Yeah, that's what I want to see from the Giants." The problem is that even though Thibodeau is dropping back the way Wink used to also do with Judon and Smith, he's not getting the results up front. And what I don't understand is why he's not getting the results up front. And so that's where I think that where I would land is to say that if he's not getting the results up front, then maybe you need to change your approach a little bit. And it's not that he won't change his approach. We saw that last year in the playoff game against Minnesota. He blitzed very little against Minnesota in the playoff game after Justin Jefferson just rang up the Giants with 100 and some odd yards receiving in the regular season game that they barely lost. Instead, he bracketed Jefferson a lot with 2 players, and I think that was one of the reasons that Cousins didn't pass to him on the final defensive play of the game for the Giants, is that he had 2 guys on him all game. So he changed his approach in a way that was effective for that game and that went against what he usually does. The question is, if he's not getting the results this year, is he going to keep on hitting his head against the wall, or is he going to change what he does a little bit to reflect the way his players are actually playing until they start playing the way that he needs them to play? And so I don't know what the answer is. I just know that I've been surprised in a bad way at how ineffective his defense has looked these first 3 games.
Absolutely. Tony, let's wrap up the show here. And what we're going to do to wrap up the show is we're going to make our predictions for Monday night's Giants-Seattle game. And the prediction part of our show is sponsored by SB Nation partner DraftKings. So gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.1800gambler.net. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY, which is 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling by calling 888-789-7777 or visiting ccpg.org. Please play responsibly on behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort. Licensee partner Golden Nugget, Lake Charles, Louisiana. 21 and over. Age varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. See sportsbook.draftkings.com/football for eligibility, terms, and responsible gaming resources. All right, Tony, we make our picks every week, and a lot of weeks we pretty much agree as a staff. Everybody will pick the Giants to win, or everybody will pick the Giants to lose. And this week it's pretty much split. You'll see if you guys look at the picks post on Big Blue View on Monday morning. I think it's a 4-3 split with 4 of 7 picking the Giants to win on Monday night. And so I'll just let you go ahead and make your pick and give your explanation, and then I'll make mine.
Okay, so well, I I pick with my heart rather than my head sometimes, and that's because I'm just doing this for fun. And so it's nice to pick the Giants and see them win and feel both good about the fact that they won and good that I picked them to win. Uh, but sometimes I pick them to lose. I pick them to lose against San Francisco. But in the picks that'll appear on Monday morning, I pick them to win this game, and there's actually some reasoning behind that. I'm not just picking with my heart. I do think that they're two fairly evenly matched teams. But what I feel the Giants have going for them is that, first of all, if you compare it to last year's game against Seattle, uh, the Giants had to travel to Seattle 3,000 miles for that game. This time, Seattle's traveling 3,000 miles to play the Giants. Last year, the Giants had just gotten back from going to London to play Green Bay when they had to fly down to play Jacksonville next, and then they had to fly to Seattle for that game. And so I think that the amount of travel the Giants had to do in advance of that game was, did them no favors in helping them be ready for the game against Seattle. This time, they're the home team. Seattle's the one that has to travel, and the Giants are having a nice 10 or 11 day rest. So I think that's in their favor. More to the point, though, Seattle has been banged up themselves. They've had their two starting offensive tackles. Both have missed most of the season so far. Charles Cross has played only part of one game, and I think Abe Lucas on the other side has played only part of one game. It's not certain yet whether they're going to be back, so Seattle might be playing backup offensive tackles on both sides of the line, and I think Seattle has also had some injuries in the secondary, and I think they have two maybe of their three starting cornerbacks, and maybe one of their safeties. I'm not sure, coming off an injury, and it's not clear whether any or all of them are going to play in the game. I get the impression that Reek Woolen is going to play in the game. I'm not so sure about Kobe Bryant, and so I think that this may be a good time for the Giants to be catching Seattle. They may be vulnerable to a pass rush, and the Giants have finally Azeez Ojulari coming back into the lineup, and so I think that's good that they might have two viable pass rushers on both sides of the line. This may be the week to have your pass rushers in against Seattle, and maybe they can get some pressure on Geno Smith better than they did last year, and better than they've done to quarterbacks this year so far. I think that Seattle's receivers are a load to handle, and they're gonna get their catches, and they're gonna get their yards, and so that I expect Seattle to put up points. But I think that the Giants will be well rested. I think they'll be highly motivated for this game. I think they won't be intimidated, which they may have been against San Francisco and Dallas. And so I'm looking for a high scoring game that the Giants will win, maybe by a field goal.
You make a lot of good points, Tony, and obviously those are all things that weigh into the situation. I'm also picking the Giants, but my reasoning, although you're right about the Seattle offensive tackles, you're right about the fact that the Seahawks in general are banged up. This being a Giants home game instead of having to travel across the country. But I always look at it this way. I always think that the desperate team is the one that has an advantage. And I'm not saying that this is not a game that Seattle doesn't want to win, that they don't need to win. But the Giants, who have tried to say all is still well, everything is still in front of us, we can still do this, our goals are still there. The Giants know that they're 1-2. They have to know the mountains that they have to climb the next 2 weeks. They know the dire straits that they'll be in if they don't come out of Monday night with a 2-2 record. And I always tend to think that the desperate team is the one with an advantage. The desperate team is the team that might give that little extra effort on a play, that might do just that little bit of extra work to get something done, to make a play, maybe even just in their preparation during the week. I always think that that desperation helps a team. And I think that really is why I'm picking the Giants. I like you. I think this is a close game. I think it could be a get healthy game for the Giants offense. I think it could be a get healthy game for their defense, but this could be a 30-27 kind of game. It could be, I almost always pick the under when I pick Giants games. If people ask me about the over under, I almost always pick the under, and I don't have it in front of me, but I think I might be tempted to pick the over this week, just because I think we could finally see the Giants march up and down the field a little bit on Monday night, but I think that Seattle's capable of doing the same.
Yeah, did I see 41 as the over under for this guy? I can't remember, to be honest.
I will have to
look
go back and look.
If it's 41, I'd certainly take the over on 41 if I were going to guess something.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to say is, as you say, a heck of a lot better going into Miami and Buffalo at 2-2 than going in at 1-3 if you still have designs on the playoffs. I would guess that by this time, probably in the Giants locker room, they're not thinking about division title anymore after the start that they've had. But they're probably still thinking about a playoff spot. And number one, if you're going to think about a playoff spot, then the likelihood is that they're going to be, or there's a good chance that they'd be involved in one of those tiebreakers for one of the final couple of playoff spots. And Seattle is probably a team they'd be in contention with for that, and so beating them, first of all, just to finish with a better record than them, it helps them if they're going to get a playoff spot. And beating them, I don't remember what I think. I don't remember where head to head comes in the tiebreakers for a playoff spot, but if you beat them, it's somewhere along the line it comes in. The Giants' problem with a playoff spot, if it comes down to tiebreakers, that at some point point differential comes into play, and the Giants have something like a minus 55 point differential right now,
Right.
and they're likely not to erase that by the end of the season. So if they want a playoff spot, they're going to have to kind of win one even Steven rather than on technicalities, by finishing with a better record than the teams they're competing against. So they probably realize in the back of their mind that if they harbor playoff aspirations, not just getting to 2-2 before those two games, but getting to 2-2 against one of the teams that's almost certainly going to be competing with them for a playoff spot, is as you say, it's a must win from many different standpoints.
Absolutely. All right, Tony, I want to remind folks that this is our Monday morning show. Tony and I will be back Tuesday morning, as we usually are, after the morning following Giants games. We'll be back with our live stream on YouTube on Tuesday morning, giving our reaction to whatever happens on Monday night. Chris Flum and Nick Filato will be live right after the game, as they always are. We'll have full coverage at Big Blue View. We'll have the recap. We'll have analysis. We'll have reaction from the locker room. Anything and everything that you guys need to follow the game and to discuss whatever happens on Monday night. So please, make sure you check out all of our content as we analyze whatever happens during Monday's game. All right. With that said, Giants fans, thank you as always for listening. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.